Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of Export Film. My name is Jack.
And my name is Ben.
And in this one, we're going to be reviewing Charlie Kaufman's I'm Thinking of Ending Things, starring Jessie Buckley, Jesse Plemons, Toni Collette, David Thewlis, and Guy Boyd. A lot of familiar faces and a lot of familiar names in this one, and a lot of familiar themes as well. So there's plenty to unpick in it. So I'll give it over to Ben.
I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Charlie Kaufman's much anticipated 2020 film is another descent into the mind of the man himself. Based on Ian Reid's debut novel of the same name, which was published in 2016, Kaufman is about as faithful to this source text as he was to Susan Reid's The Orchid Thief in his 2002 triumph adaptation. What I love about adaptation, both the film and the act itself, is that Kaufman seems to be able to resolve the age-old tension that exists between the cinematic or visual and the literary arts. Rather than attempting to reconcile, he always creates something which is entirely new, but is still thematically linked or tied to the book in some way. Though the visual and the literary share lots in common, and that these refrains and metaphors can be writ large on the screen, the two can never slot into one another absolutely or completely, and that's something which Kaufman recognises, and something which, in my opinion, he succeeds in doing in this film. Because the adaptation of a book into a film requires a sort of transmogrification. It's not about change or reform, it's about an absolute uprooting. And that's exactly what we see in I'm Thinking of Ending Things, in which the psychological elements of the book are manifested in the classic Kaufman tropes. If Synecdoche, New York captured perfectly the perspective of dream logic and the mutability of time, I'm Thinking of Ending Things is able to speak about memory and the way in which we tell ourselves stories of the past. Because as soon as something fades away from being present, it becomes past. It loses its objective character. It becomes something which is subjective because it only exists in the mind of the people who experienced it. It's not available any longer. As Lucy says in the film, quote, "Other animals live in the present. Humans cannot, so they invented hope." And I think that is classic Kaufman, if I may say so. Once again, we're dealing with Kaufman's well-born theme that life is about a series of choices, and that the present opens up to us a number of seemingly infinite possibilities. It takes the lulls in one's life, such as old age, but not exclusively, for one to reflect upon those untravelled roads of things which cannot be said and things which cannot be unsaid. I'm Thinking of Ending Things offers something a little different, however. To do another quote, "People like to think of themselves as points moving through time, but I think it's probably the opposite. We're stationary and time passes through us, blowing like cold wind, stealing our heat." So the way in which this film is told is immediately jarring. It's told from the perspective and the interior monologue of Lucy, but it becomes clear that she's not the main character. This film seems to be entirely about Jake. When we open, it's Lucy who tells us through that very interior monologue that she's visiting Jake's parents for the first time. But when they're in the car, it seems that Jake can almost hear her monologue, as every time she pauses to think to herself or speak to the audience in this way, he seems to interrupt her and ask her what she just said or what she's thinking about. We then proceed to cut between the car ride between Lucy and Jake and to this old man who, it is revealed, is the janitor at a school. And as he listens on the radio, I just want to say that I thought this piece was an absolute triumph, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. What did you think about it?
I absolutely adore it. I'm completely enamoured. So I'm looking forward to kind of dissecting it a bit more. It's quite agit, the storytelling, when you first plunged into it, because it's setting so much stuff up simultaneously, in that classic Kaufman way, in the way that your mind kind of juggles things and states of dream and states of panic and reverie and all the rest of it. Yeah, when they get to Jake's parents' house, you think that they're going to go straight into the house, and it's quite a relief because you've been boxed in that car the entire time, and of course the aspect ratio as well gives this sense of claustrophobia as well, just to reinforce it. And then when they arrive, you get this sort of like horror style Tony Collette waving from the window, and then Jake gets out of the car and he's like, "Oh, I'll just show you around. I just want to stretch my legs." And you're like, "What? Well, just go in the house, like just get out." And then they proceed to the farm. But that's sort of like in a dream where you're not quite getting to the place that you want to be, and it's like this trudge and almost like slow motion and stuff. He really like stresses that part of it. And I think also when you get to the house, I think it becomes probably the most genre Charlie Kaufman film, because it does play out like a horror. Even the soundtrack sort of gets really encroaching, and I don't want to say obvious, but it definitely scores the scenes and amps up the tension. And I think that's what sort of sets this apart from a lot of Kaufman's work. I mean, his work is usually kind of operates in his own lane or whatever, but this one at times plays out like an out-and-out horror. And I know the book, I haven't read the book, but I've heard that it is more of a sort of straight-up slasher sort of thing. Not slasher, but more of a genre piece. But he definitely plays on that, but does it in his own way. It's very more suggestive than the book, I imagine.
It's only a short piece. It is definitely. I've not read it either, but it is a psychological, overtly like psychological piece, and it's short as well. I think it is probably you could probably read the book faster than you could watch the film.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Yeah, I've watched interviews with him where he talks about what he left out, and like you were saying with the allusions to adaptation, I mean, it's kind of inescapable for Kaufman not to end up writing about himself. He always bangs on about how he can't write any other way than subjectively, and that's why I love his work. I think that's the major strength of it.
So I think we should probably start with some concrete with this review. I think, obviously the dinner table scene is from the film poster, and it is clearly the central piece, visually, certainly. So I guess we should sort of introduce that, because it is a very strange scene in which Lucy has been warned before that Jake's mother's ill, that she won't be putting on much of a spread, and they arrive, and the table is obviously full, as if it's like out of a cartoon or something. Like everything is very, very colourful and alive almost. And the central piece is this piece of ham, I guess you would say. And obviously before they've just had the discussion that they had to kill a pig because it had become infested with maggots. And all of a sudden there's the centrepiece is this, this pig.
And then the pigs were cannibalizing each other as well.
That's right. And all this food is put out an enormous spread, and they sit there, and nobody eats anything.
This endless supply of carrots as well. Just gets passed around. It is genius, that bit. And it's so excruciating as well. I mean, it's just the levels that Tony Collette is working at, this hysterical sort of constant laughter that's paired off by David Thewlis's just kind of slow, lurching mannerisms that look like he's gonna laugh and then he'll turn around in confusion and stuff. And after you've had the kind of slow glacial pace of the car journey, this is quite overwhelming when you get to this bit, and it's a reprieve. It's as a sort of energy levels go through the roof, and it's so. I mean, Thewlis's performance, I cannot say enough nice cut, and he turns into like a 50-year-old, like who he is now. There's this immediately. It's when you get the most obvious time fuckery, where you get introduced as soon as you get in this house. It's like this liminal limbo space where anything goes, and he changes age in one shot, and then they all sit down, and then there's this static spread, But I think it's interesting what you're saying about about it being like cartoon levels, because obviously there's a cartoon thing that runs in the flashbacks and then becomes more and more pronounced as the film goes on, and like again this sense of as you were saying in your opening, this like childish sense of history, of your own personal history, and like food appearing and all these colors. It is like they're in a cartoon. He's kind of replaying this in his mind in a very childish way, despite these really intense sort of metaphysical conversations that are happening around the table in this very like skewed, frantic way. So yeah, Thewlis just absolutely smashes it. Just like every single sentence that comes out of his mouth is gold. I mean, surely he had, I don't know whether that was on the page, all the different dialogue that was on there. I mean, if it is, I mean, credit to Kaufman for capturing that. But obviously, Thewlis has completely brought this character to life. But yeah, and I think what's quite underrated, or what could be underrated in those sequences, is Jesse Plemons' performance. I mean, his performance throughout the film is great, but like his awkwardness, and he's like this, he looks like, I mean, he's literally blushing sometimes, and he's got like, he's really like palpable, his sort of nervousness, and that's not an easy thing to pull off, I don't think, or get convincingly anyway. And when you've got these like really over the top performances, and your job is to be the sort of understated one that's just kind of soaking it in, you do think that these two nutters are his parents. You know what I mean? It's like this shame that's on him is really, you get a real strong sense of it. I think his performance is amazing in it.
And I guess we should probably talk about like the janitor character, like perfectly being able to channel those same sort of things, but like in a much more physical way. Like you certainly tell with like the younger version, like let's say it's like very, very muted and like suffering, but like with like the flamboyancy of age, that older janitor character like has to carry it in a very different way, but in a way which is no less convincing. I just love the way that he walks and that big belly that he's got.
Yeah, those flashbacks are quite disorientating, especially when the janitor is sitting having his own solitary dins at work, watching a film.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I wasn't expecting this in a film either. So he's sitting down watching this like fucking really hammy rom-com, and he's watching it and he's just kind of like blank while he's watching it. I mean, the dialogue's hilarious. And then he just like, it goes in the film, and all of a sudden the classic Kaufman film within a film sort of thing goes off because he can't help himself. But the film, and all of a sudden the title card comes up and it just says directed by Robert Zemeckis, and it's like a huge diss. And I was like, well, I laughed my head off, and I was like, I can't believe he's fucking done that. That's hilarious. And then it switches back to the dinner scene. You're back in the thing, and you're just like, where am I? He's just like completely going for it on the edit. It must have been buzzing, man. I would have been. But the sensibilities of this film are just so far up my street. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people got pissed off by the reasons why, all that kind of stuff, but I love the audaciousness of it. I mean, no one makes films like this who can actually, you know, is worthy of having an esque at the end of the name, you know, is just actual. I mean, I think he's a genius, and I can't get enough of it.
So I think it's interesting that Jesse Buckley's character is presented as having all these different professions and talents, that to the extent that it makes absolutely no sense. The fact that she is a physicist and a neurobiologist, and as well as being a painter, a landscape painter, and a poet as well. It is the point at which the sort of, she is kind of the focal point of the film, but also the focal point of all these very sort of highfalutin references that Kaufman loves. You know, Kaufman always loves to teach you a new word, and this is definitely a film where there's one or two words which are entering into the old common vocabulary.
Yeah. I was like scratching my head going, I know what that is.
Yeah, you do exactly what he knows you're going to do. You go, of course, I know what that is.
Yeah, of course.
I hope nobody asks me. Yeah, laugh the loudest.
Yeah. Yeah, the one that struck out for me was ipseity when they're around the table, and then they do actually clarify what that means as well, don't they?
Yeah.
Because Jesse Buckley says it afterwards. Because his team name for when he's doing the quiz, when she gives the dating anecdote, and his team name was Brezhnev's eyebrows. But apparently he wanted to call his team name ipseity. Both of which are, you can imagine Kaufman giving his old pub quiz team name, can you?
Yeah, definitely the latter. I can imagine being pissed off with Brezhnev's eyebrows, as it not being like esoteric enough.
Ipseity. Yeah, and ipseity means selfhood, which is obviously quite a knowing wink wink to what's going on in the film itself.
Of course. And the first time in which that appears most overtly is when he's talking about Wordsworth. I read Ode, Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. And I love the fact that as far as I can recall, that's the only reference in the film which is brushed off and not explored. That actual poem, Ode, the reason why I think it's brushed off is because it's kind of like the film, in a poetic, condensed way. It is talking about like the loss of time and things that have happened once will never happen again, and obviously from the perspective of old age on childhood. The immortality from recollections, and I love the fact that that's just like put in your face and then torn away, and it's the only time that really happens for like probably one of the most indulgent films that I've seen in a very long time when it comes to stuff like that.
Oh yeah, and it's like a very difficult thing to pull off, because usually when you're met with some kind of esoteric reference or a literary reference within a film, my usual reaction is just kind of tutting and going fuck off.
Yeah.
But like it just, I'm not sure how he pulls it off, but he pulls it off all the time.
I think with charm, with really strong writing, but also really strong delivery as well. Like the recovery, the way in which people recover from that. Because that's something that happens in real life, isn't it? You say something that falls flat and you try to recover. And especially when you're making some sort of like reference like that. Because the way that he comes back is he says like, get your word, what is it? Wordsworth gets you Wordsworth. I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah, it's a proper naff joke.
Yeah. Get your Wordsworth with Wordsworth. That's it.
Yeah. And she's sort of she's the audience at that point, and she just kind of going, yeah, all right.
Yeah, just that sort of like quick recovery, great back and forth, snappy dialogue. He really does have a great ear. Not just for like everyday dialogue, a great ear for like, when you're talking about these subjects and you're talking about the big things, the way in which you can like intercut, little falls, little lulls, like little jokes in there.
Yeah,
he's got proper.
Well, he's got really good understanding, probably because he is an awkward man himself. But like how awkward interactions, and like when you got someone who's quite shy and introverted, when they sort of just come out with something, and it's kind of just like, well, where did that come from? And then just recoiling again. It's like, no, I won't do that. And obviously, it's really telling that he would become a caretaker later in life, and he'd just be the kind of lone wolf that's just wandering through, privy to childhood in like just a real sort of tragic comic way.
Yeah, like sort of existing in that transitional space, which is the high school from adolescence to adulthood, especially in America. That's interesting that's kind of his, not his purgatory, but his resting place.
Yeah, resting place. Yeah, definitely resting place.
And I love the way in which that's manifested in musicals, I think that we should sort of return to this focus on Oklahoma, and that this isn't something which exists in the source material. A lot of people come at adaptation as a way of sort of trimming down a book to make it fit a film. Lots of people who've read a book before watching a film, they'll say, oh, I can't believe they didn't include this scene. I mean, this is something that I was doing last week, admittedly. So we're all guilty of this. Something which you very, very rarely see, however, is the insertion of things which aren't like, plot devices. That's obviously going to happen. you know, ways in which you sort of try and condense a story requires, you know, some scenes in between. But the insertion of themes and something so large like the musical numbers in this film, and of course, the way in which that really is the ending of the film. That's what we're working towards. I think it's a very, very bold thing, and I think it's a very necessary thing for a filmmaker to do when adapting a book, is to sort of have these moments in which they say, you know, this is my film. And
Yeah.
this is what we were talking about with constraints and stuff. It's like, yeah, you can be forced to adapt something, but you wholly can make it into something which is a Kaufman film. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like a lot of filmmakers, like, we sort of think of them as taking a break whenever they adapt something. You know, it's like something just to pay the bills, get their names like in the front of everyone's minds again. Um, but I love that uncompromising nature of that. So I guess we should sort of talk about like what is this sort of significance of the musical element? Because obviously we talked about cartoons a little bit, but yeah, this sort of what how would we describe musicals? As a sort of idealized version, very very
No, it's like heightened reality, isn't it? And it's
heightened
also,
reality. That's what I wanted.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's also escapist, isn't it? Fundamentally, I mean, when you think of musicals, you think of this sort of like frothy, ridiculous world in which, you know, instead of
in which
conversing,
people sing.
we all sing. But there is something inherently surreal in that. And it takes someone like Kaufman to kind of unpick that, because like when you're looking, I mean, I haven't seen Oklahoma. As I was saying earlier, I had to Google to see what it's actually about. When as soon as I saw farm, I was like, right, we're in farm. But there's something sort of otherworldly and old timey about it. And obviously just from seeing it in the film, it's obviously set, it's a period musical, and obviously what comes with that is this sort of manipulation and manipulation of the past, this sort of like perceived reality which seeps into the film. But to bring it back to what you were saying about, you know, the nature of adaptation when it comes to filmmakers and stuff like that, to read something, I mean, I haven't read the book, but like to read that and then to come up with the Oklahoma thing as a sort of framing device is sort of magical, like to integrate that. I mean, escapism in musicals as a sort of a literal thing. It's like escapism is death, and this musical comes to symbolize death. And again, it's such an inspired move to do that for a story that's about suicide, but to, you know, wrap it all up in that. I think it's. I mean, not only is it surreal, but it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. It really is. I love the fact that there's, I guess, two scenes. I don't know if they're two numbers, but obviously the bit where he's accepting the Nobel Prize with the background, and also the performance of the two dancers, who are very very well cast. They look very very similar. And obviously, like, you've got the whole age thing with, I guess it's age and youth. Those are the two final numbers to go out on, right?
Yeah. And again, there's this meta thing as well, this version of himself on stage, and there's this like separation. It's again, this harks back to the warehouses within Synecdoche, that sort of thing.
Yeah, they definitely reminded me of that as well, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and this is something that we kind of wanted to explore in this nature of adaptation, how Kaufman can't escape from writing himself into his stories, this like subjective screenwriting, and obviously he's just released his debut novel Antkind as well, and we were talking about how it seemingly that process of writing a novel seems to have seeped into this as well, because there are certain literary elements to it and overt references that seem to be signaling to the sort of context in which this film was written and adapted.
Yeah, I guess there's definitely something to be said for like the shifting between forms, because obviously literature is something, especially the novelistic form, is something which requires like an absolute commitment to interiority. It really is. It can only be, that's the formal limitations of literature. It can only be an exploration from that perspective of that complete interiority. And yeah, I love that idea of like switching between one mode and the other, but like still having like the residue on your shoes when you walk in, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
which is something which definitely comes into this film, I reckon.
For sure. I mean, you made allusions to like the film adaptation in your opening, and obviously that was a real life situation for Kaufman where he was actually trying to adapt a book, and he was trying to kind of, like Nicolas Cage playing Kaufman in adaptation. He wants it to be a pure, faithful adaptation of this novel about orchids, but it ends up being about him, his life, and then it becomes a thriller.
Yeah.
And and there's a similar thing at play, and I'm thinking of ending things because, seeing the run up to the film, it's like you've never had this in a Charlie Kaufman film before, but like seemingly you've got a female protagonist. You've got Jessie Buckley, and it's like, oh right, he's put a female in the central role, and then soon you realise that all is not what it seems, and in actuality, it's the Jesse Plemons character who is effectively, since this is a subjective and it being a Kaufman film, is a manifestation of Kaufman to a certain extent. I mean, the references and everything that he's talking about are thoroughly Kaufman. But I think this comes back to the kind of prowess of the performances in the film, where they kind of do take this into a different strata, a different lane. Definitely has a different sort of texture to his other films. This one, would you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
And like even like the aspect ratio as well, like the boxy sort of academy thing. I haven't seen that before. So he seems to be sort of stepping outside himself, but still it being thoroughly Kaufman-esque.
Because I didn't know anything about this film before going into it. It was so exciting to all of a sudden be thrust into Academy ratio like that. I mean, that's where I feel comfortable. It's where I feel at home. And it was something that I was completely not expecting from someone like Kaufman. He sort of takes the idea of authorship not so much in that sort of more like formal presentation way. It's more like in the substance of the piece. Like Kaufman makes films which, they don't have to be viewed in a very specific way,
No.
And that was such a breath of fresh air to have something like that. For us to embrace genre conventions, for us to, go for this Academy ratio, and for this commitment to colour as well, which is something which I can't recall having seen him play with too much in the past. But I don't know if you noticed, like the play between red and blue, which, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of that, but it was definitely something which he experimented with in this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as sort of vehement about that as you. I kind of appreciate when they kind of luxuriate in colours that I like. I'm not a big fan of when they go to town on red or anything like that. But the thing that I kind of took note with the colours is that the sort of like jaded wallpaper of these patterns, they sort of coalesce into the pictures and stuff a lot of the time. So there's like, you can see that there's frames on the wall, but the only thing sort of distinguishing some of the photos are the frames around them, you know what I mean? So you have this sort of like fluidity in the walls that feel like you're going to get like a Videodrome situation where they're going to pulse or something like that. I like interesting mirror placements and stuff. Like I noticed, like you get in sort of corners of rooms, and it all seems to kind of jar against one another. So yeah, the production design is, I mean, it's been there on his other films, obviously, but this one, because it's so small and claustrophobic, you do have time to kind of like, indulge in the far corners and stuff like that, and
because we only have a limited number of locations, right?
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, as well as that, just how good the makeup is as well. We're like with Hewlett and Tony Collette, where they're shifting. It must have took ages. Like half of their time on set must have just been in makeup trailers or whatever, just like getting dolled up.
I did enjoy like the set design. Obviously, the set dressing was gorgeous in the house.
Yeah,
scene.
I love the wallpaper as well. I'd have that.
Yeah, same. But the stuff like costumes, I guess, was probably more what was jumping out to me. Because obviously, the colour of her clothes change inexplicably
Yeah.
between the drive there and the drive back. So she drives there and she's wearing like this bright red coat, or more like a pinky red sort of coat. Then obviously the night scenes when they're returning, she's got like this deep blue sort of number going on. Meanwhile, he's always wearing black. And I think, I mean, it is a good representation insofar as since she's a projection, she must be projected in all of the brilliance and all like the depth of light and stuff. And he's just like, because it is quite cool because
slope though, isn't he?
yeah, because he's got like this big black coat on, and he's got the big black hat on, and he's got a collared shirt on that goes right up under his neck. There's not a whole lot going on. He's just a little bit of a face, and then black all around him, and then she just like emanates light. Emanates color. Sorry. Which is obviously something which Kaufman makes explicit reference to in the script when he says that color doesn't exist; it only exists in people's brains. And then she says, "Of course I know that. I'm a physicist."
Yeah. She has like a proper boheme thing going on, doesn't she? It's like displaces her even more in this environment a lot of the time. Because he's like, he's just like this, as I was saying, a bit of a schlo.
And obviously that we should probably touch on like the ice cream scene, because that is one of the big sets. That's a prominent theme in the trailer. But I mean, there are only a handful of sets, really. We have the dining room, we have the school, and we have this ice cream spot, which is seemingly out in the middle of nowhere, as if almost in a dream. It's like this liminal ice cream stop in the middle of a blizzard.
That's great.
And then there's two. It's kind of red, isn't it? It's red on the outside, and then you've got the two seemingly twin-like or very, very similar-looking women who've like got
popular girls.
Yeah, they've got like this bold red lipstick on, and they've got like the hair pinned back, and they're both blonde, that sort of thing. And then you've got,
I mean, that 50s iconography is like inherently, surreal in it. Obviously, it's something that Lynch explores all the time. There is something about it when it's situated in the middle of nothing that does kind of bring this eerie vibe.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense within the context of the story if this is recollections from days gone by. Perfect implementation and execution, I reckon. And then they're sort of pushed to one side, and then you're revealed with like this young brunette, obviously a contrast, and then she's got like
she's got skin condition,
psoriasis or something.
I loved her character. I really sort of related to her misanthropic, I hate everything thing.
Yeah. I thought it was like, I can't think of the word, but like the perfect, like, I know what you mean. I definitely.
Well, it was weird because she kind of has her own like personality, doesn't she? In a way that the other characters don't. Like they're all heightened, and she's a bit more like, "You've come this far," sort of like harbinger, sort of crow or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved her character.
I mean, you can't avoid the mythical or like the fairy tale when you're dealing with something like this.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing which I sort of wanted to say was that, I was sort of saying that she's dressed all in red and then she's dressed all in blue when they're leaving. Well, that building is all red, and like the people there are red. I think it's really interesting that like it's sort of almost impossible for her to be dressed in red. Therefore, she had to be. It makes perfect sense when you think about it from that perspective of a dream or like a recollection. Insofar as if she was still wearing the same clothes, she would be like invisible.
I think we should probably sort of round things up and give us closing thoughts and stuff.
I agree. We don't want to go too deep into this because we want to keep it relatively concise.
I think it is an absolute gem, like endless rewatchability as far as I'm concerned. If nothing else, like I've said about Theolis's performance, just like iconic. I think some of the scenes in this film will be iconic.
Certainly for us, anyway.
Yeah, certainly for us. And if it is for us, surely there is other people out there that feel the same way.
There must be.
Yeah, but I think again, like the thing that we love about Kaufman is like wrestling these huge themes, but doing it in his own idiosyncratic way. And kind of doing it with a wit and surrealist edge, and not pampering anyone, and just kind of like getting the best out of people. So yeah, highly recommend. if we're going to do that sort of thing, if you didn't get that anyway. But yeah, please watch it if you haven't already seen it. It's on Netflix, and hopefully it sticks there for a long time. I imagine because it's a Netflix production, it'll probably stay on there.
Indefinitely, I would presume.
Yeah.
I don't know where else it could go because they don't go to DVD, so
No.
I would imagine they hang on to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure most people have heard about it. You know, we're not. This isn't a niche reference out the pocket or anything. Like, as I said, it's had its 5 minutes of fame, being the talked about thing for 1 week, with the rapid turnover of films that happens over there. But I completely agree with you. I think it's an absolute triumph, and I just love the way in which he works within limitations like that. And to be honest, like, we've sort of said in the past that, like, his screenplays that have been directed by other people are also really, really strong. And I love that fact. I think, in my mind, that works within the same context of this idea of constraints and limitation. Like, when you're given absolute control, it can go in several directions. Obviously, you can go Synecdoche in New York and make an absolute masterpiece. But you can also go in the Anomalisa town, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Kaufman is someone who always thrives within constraints. And when he's given absolute control, it can go either way. But for me, I'm thinking of ending things. Obviously, like, he has, he wrote and directed, but, like, he worked, as we were saying, working within genre conventions, working within the convention of adaptation, is something which he just absolutely thrives in that environment. And I just love the fact that he's able to say similar sorts of things, but always in a new way, and in a way which is visually exciting.
For sure. I mean, the cinematic, and it's a difficult thing to pull off all those, like, sort of disparate elements. There's, like, very cerebral elements a lot of the time, and kind of bring them together in such a way that makes sense.
I'm always so surprised by the way in which Kaufman can be a writer's writer, but also such a visual filmmaker as well, and have such an eye for the visual, despite the fact that he is so engrossed, in my opinion, is so engrossed in the literary allusions and way of writing. But you can just tell that the way that he thinks it is in images. I love that. I love that like confluence.
Mad props. Fucking
absolutely. Big recommend.
So, as we always say, like, please do get in touch, because the echo chamber still exists, very much so. And we're 5 deep now. We're going to stay on the contemporary film reviewing tip for a bit. Next one, we're going to do Saint Maud. Highly anticipated. Both horror film fans.
Yeah.
So looking forward to getting into a proper genre piece.
So, as always, you can catch us on Instagram, Export Film Podcast, on Twitter, Export Film, and you can drop us an email, exportfilmpodcast@gmail.com. Please, anything you've got to say, anything at all.
So yes, goodbye until next time.
Sleep tight.